They ignore you, not because you have no value, but because you are still trying to prove it. Right now, there are people with less talent, less discipline, and less intelligence than you, getting ahead. Not because they are better, but because they understand something you don't. And if you don't see this now, you will keep repeating the same cycle for years. You wake up, you try, you push, you stay consistent, and still nothing changes, no recognition, no real progress. Just effort that feels invisible. That feeling slowly turns into frustration, then doubt, then silence inside your own mind. Most people break at this point, not because life is hard, but because they were trained to look in the wrong direction. You were taught to chase attention, approval, validation. You were taught that being seen means you are winning. That is the trap. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 2, Paragraph 1, the idea is clear. Your mind becomes what you give it power over. And most people give their power to other people's opinions. That is why they lose control before they even begin. But here is what almost no one tells you. Control alone is not enough. You can master your emotions, you can stay calm, you can avoid reacting, and still stay exactly where you are. Because control without direction creates stagnation. This is where everything changes. There is another layer that most people never reach. A level where discipline is no longer just about staying strong, but about building something real, something measurable, something that changes your position in life. This is where the thinking of Napoleon Hill enters, not to replace control, but to give it purpose. Because while one man learns to stay silent, another uses that same silence to build power. And if you understand how these two forces work together, you stop being the person who waits and become the person who moves. What you are about to see is not motivation. It is a shift, a different way of thinking that separates those who stay invisible from those who rise without needing permission. If you miss this, nothing changes. If you understand it, everything starts moving. You believe the problem is that people do not see you. You think if they noticed your effort, your discipline, your consistency, everything would change. More respect, more opportunities, more results. That belief is exactly what keeps you stuck. When your mind is focused on being seen, you are no longer focused on building. You start measuring your progress based on reactions, not outcomes. A comment becomes validation. Silence becomes rejection. And without noticing, your actions begin to depend on how others respond. This is the invisible trap. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 6, Paragraph 30, the principle is direct. Your worth is not determined by the opinion of others, but by the quality of your actions. Yet most people invert this. They act in order to be seen, instead of acting to create something real. Look at what happens in practice. You post something and check if people react. You start something new and look for approval before continuing. You hesitate, not because you lack ability, but because you are waiting for a signal from outside. That delay costs more than you think. While you are waiting to be recognized, someone else is using that same time to build without needing validation. They are not stronger. They are not more talented. They simply remove the need to be seen before taking action. This is where the separation begins. Napoleon Hill describes a concept that most people ignore: definiteness of purpose. It means having a clear direction that does not depend on external approval. When your direction is clear, you do not pause to ask if others agree. You move because you decided. Now combine this with the Stoic principle of control. If you stop reacting to people, you save energy. If you stop needing approval, you remove hesitation. And when hesitation disappears, execution becomes consistent. This is not about ignoring people completely. It is about removing their influence over your decisions. Think about your last week. How many actions did you delay because you were unsure of how others would respond? How many ideas did you not execute because you wanted confirmation first? How many times did you check for recognition instead of continuing the work. Each one of those moments reinforces the trap, and the longer you stay in it, the harder it becomes to leave. Because you start believing that attention is progress, when in reality, it is only distraction. There is a reason why many people stay in the same place for years, not because they are incapable, but because they never shift their focus from being seen to becoming valuable. The moment you understand this, something changes. You stop performing. You start producing. And that is the first step out of invisibility. You learn to stay calm. You learn to hold your reactions. You trained yourself to not explode, not chase, not beg for attention. On the surface, it looks like progress. It feels like discipline, but something still does not move. Days pass, weeks pass. You remain controlled, but your position in life stays the same. No real growth, no clear advancement, just stability that slowly turns into stagnation. This is the second trap. Control, by itself, does not create results. It only prevents damage. It keeps you from losing, but it does not guarantee that you will win. In Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 1, the teaching is direct. Some things are within your control and others are not. Most people stop here. They learn to control what they can, and they believe that is enough. It is not. Control is the foundation. Direction is what builds on top of it. Without direction, control becomes a form of comfort. You feel disciplined, but you are not progressing. You feel stable, but you are not advancing. You avoid mistakes, but you also avoid growth. Now consider the difference. One person controls emotions and avoids reacting. He stays silent, observes, and waits. Another person does the same but adds a clear objective. He decides where he is going, what he is building, and what must be done daily. The first person protects himself. The second person moves forward. This is where Napoleon Hill changes the equation. He introduces the idea that your mind must be directed toward a definite goal, not a vague desire, not a general intention, a specific outcome that guides your actions. When you combine control with direction, something shifts. Your silence is no longer passive. It becomes strategic. Your discipline is no longer just resistance. It becomes execution. Every action starts to point somewhere instead of being scattered. Look at your current situation. You may already have control. You may already avoid distractions, unnecessary reactions, and emotional decisions. But ask yourself one question. Where is all that control being applied? If there is no clear answer, that is the problem. Energy without direction dissipates. Focus without a target loses impact. Discipline without a defined path becomes routine without results. This is why many people who study Stoicism never change their external reality. They master internal stability, but never convert it into movement. The shift happens when you assign purpose to your control. You define a goal that is measurable. You align your daily actions with that goal. You remove anything that does not contribute to it, and you repeat this process without needing external validation. Now your mind is not only controlled, it is pointed, and once it is pointed, it becomes difficult to stay in the same place. You think silence is weakness. You think if you are not speaking, reacting, or showing results immediately, you are falling behind. That belief is costing you more than you realize. Silence is not the absence of action. It is the absence of noise. And when the noise disappears, something else becomes possible. Focus. In Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, Letter 13, the idea is clear. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. Most of that suffering comes from external pressure, from the need to respond, to explain, to justify. When you remove that pressure, your mind stabilizes. And when your mind stabilizes, your decisions improve. Now look at how most people operate. They react instantly. They respond to every message. They defend themselves at the smallest sign of disrespect. They explain their plans before they execute them. They look for acknowledgement at every step. This creates constant interruption. Every reaction breaks your focus. Every explanation drains your energy. Every attempt to be understood delays your execution. That is why they stay busy, but do not move forward. Now compare this with a different approach. A person who chooses silence does not rush to respond. He does not waste time proving his intentions. He does not interrupt his own progress to satisfy curiosity from others. He observes, he processes, he acts. This creates a gap. While others are reacting, he is building. While others are explaining, he is executing. While others are looking for attention, he is creating results. This gap is the hidden advantage. Napoleon Hill describes a similar idea when he talks about concentrated effort. Energy becomes powerful when it is directed and uninterrupted. Silence is what protects that concentration. When you stop reacting, you stop leaking energy. When you stop explaining, you protect your plans. When you stop seeking attention, you gain time. Time to think, time to plan, time to execute. Most people underestimate how much they lose through distraction. They believe the problem is lack of opportunity, lack of support, or lack of recognition. In reality, the problem is fragmentation. Their attention is divided. Their focus is broken. Their actions are inconsistent. Silence solves this. It removes unnecessary input. It reduces emotional interference. It allows your mind to stay aligned with your objective. This is not about isolating yourself from the world. It is about controlling what enters your mind and when it enters. Think about how much more you could produce if you removed constant reactions from your day. How much clearer your decisions would be if you were not influenced by every opinion around you. How much faster you would move if your energy was not being drained in small, irrelevant interactions. This is where silence becomes power. Not because it makes you invisible, but because it makes you efficient. And efficiency, applied consistently, creates results that do not need to be announced. You already have control. You already learned to stay silent. You already reduced reactions and distractions. Now there is only one thing separating you from real movement: direction. Without direction, discipline becomes repetition. You wake up, you act, you stay consistent, but nothing compounds. Days look productive, yet results do not accumulate. This is where most people get stuck without realizing. They are active, but not aligned. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 7, Paragraph 4, the principle is simple. If you do not know to which port you are sailing, no wind is favorable. Control gives you stability, but direction defines your destination. This is where Napoleon Hill introduces the idea that changes everything. Definiteness of purpose. Not a vague intention like, I want to do better. Not a loose desire like, I want more money. A clear objective that can guide your decisions daily. When your objective is unclear, your actions scatter. You move but not forward. You work, but not towards something. You stay busy, but remain in the same position. Now imagine the opposite. You define a specific goal. You decide exactly what you are building. You know what needs to be done today, tomorrow, and next week. Every action either moves you closer or gets removed. This creates alignment. Your time becomes structured. Your decisions become faster. Your focus becomes sharper. You no longer waste energy choosing what to do, because the objective already dictates the next step. Most people avoid this level of clarity because it forces responsibility. When the goal is clear, excuses become visible. Delays become obvious. Distractions become unacceptable. That is why they stay in vagueness. It feels safer, but safety does not create progress. Think about your current situation. If you had to define one objective right now, something measurable, something that could change your position in life, what would it be? If that answer is not immediate, that is the gap. Because without that answer, your discipline has nowhere to go. Once the objective is defined, everything changes. You begin to filter your actions. You remove what does not contribute. You double down on what moves you forward. You stop negotiating with distractions because they no longer fit the direction. This is where control transforms into execution. Your silence protects your focus. Your discipline sustains your effort. And your objective gives meaning to every action you take. At this point, you are no longer reacting to life. You are moving it. And once movement starts with clarity, it becomes difficult to return to confusion. You now understand control. You understand silence. You defined a clear objective. At this point, most people believe they are ready to change their life. They are not. Because there is one final gap that destroys almost every plan: execution. The difference between knowing and doing is where most lives stop moving. You can have clarity, discipline, and intention, but if your actions are inconsistent, nothing compounds. In Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, Chapter 9, the idea is direct. Do not explain your philosophy, embody it. Most people do the opposite. They think, they plan, they talk, but they do not sustain action long enough to produce results. Execution fails for a simple reason. People rely on motivation instead of structure. They act when they feel ready. They act when they feel inspired. They act when conditions seem favorable. And because feelings fluctuate, their actions fluctuate. This creates inconsistency. Now compare this with a different approach. A person who understands execution does not negotiate with his own mind. He defines what must be done and does it regardless of how he feels. Not with intensity, but with repetition. This is where Napoleon Hill reinforces the principle of persistence. Not a short burst of effort, but continuous action applied over time toward a definite goal. Execution is not about doing more. It is about doing what matters, repeatedly. Look at your current routine. How many times did you start something and stop after a few days? How many plans did you abandon because results were not immediate? How often did you wait for the right moment instead of creating it? Each interruption resets your progress. Consistency removes that reset. When you execute daily, even in small steps, something begins to accumulate. Skills improve, speed increases, resistance decreases. What once felt difficult becomes automatic. This is where most people fail to see what is happening. They expect visible results early. When they do not see them, they assume nothing is working. But beneath the surface, alignment is being built. Capacity is increasing. Momentum is forming. Execution requires you to trust this phase. You act before the reward appears. You move before recognition exists. You continue before results confirm your effort. This is uncomfortable. That discomfort is the filter. Most people stop here, not because they cannot continue, but because they want certainty before commitment. They want proof before persistence. That proof only comes after repetition. Once you cross this phase, execution becomes identity. You no longer depend on motivation. You no longer question if you should act. You simply follow the structure you created. At that point, progress becomes predictable. Not fast, not easy, but inevitable. And when execution becomes consistent, the distance between where you are and where you want to be starts to close. You already know what to do. You understand control. You chose a direction. You know the actions required. At this point, the only thing that can stop you is delay. Waiting feels harmless. It feels like preparation, like you are organizing your thoughts, aligning your plan, choosing the right moment. But in reality, waiting is the most expensive decision you can make. Every day you delay, someone else moves. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 5, Paragraph 1, the message is direct. At dawn, remind yourself that you have work to do as a human being, not later, not when you feel ready, now. Most people ignore this. They wait to feel confident. They wait for better conditions. They wait for more information. And while they wait, time keeps moving forward without negotiation. Time does not reward intention, it rewards action. Napoleon Hill reinforces this with a principle that most people underestimate. Decision must be fast, and change of decision must be slow. Successful people move quickly when they know what they want. They do not stay in hesitation. Look at how hesitation works. You think about an action. You consider the outcome. You imagine what could go wrong. You delay. That delay creates doubt. Doubt creates inaction. Inaction reinforces the belief that you are not ready. This cycle repeats. The longer you stay in it, the harder it becomes to break. Not because the action is difficult, but because your mind becomes conditioned to postpone. Now consider the opposite. You decide, and you act immediately. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to create movement. That movement breaks hesitation. It creates momentum. Momentum reduces resistance. This is how progress starts. Most people believe they need clarity before action. In reality, clarity often comes after action. You understand what works by doing, not by thinking. Waiting delays that understanding. Think about the opportunities you already delayed, ideas you did not execute, actions you postponed, decisions you left unresolved. Each one had potential to create movement, but was stopped by hesitation. That cost accumulates. While you were waiting, time passed. While time passed, others moved. While others moved, the gap increased. This is not about competition, it is about position. If you stay in the same place, the world does not stop with you, it continues, and your relative position declines. The cost of waiting is invisible at first. There is no immediate loss, no clear consequence. But over time, the impact becomes undeniable. Lost time becomes lost opportunities. Lost opportunities become lost results. The only way to break this is immediate action. Not tomorrow, not later. Now. Even a small action creates a shift. It interrupts hesitation. It proves that movement is possible. And once movement starts, it becomes easier to continue. You do not need the perfect plan. You need the first step. Because the longer you wait, the more you lose. And once you understand that, waiting stops being comfortable. It becomes unacceptable. Up to this point, everything you learned can still be treated as technique. Control your emotions, stay silent, define a goal, execute daily, act without waiting. These are actions. They can be started and stopped. That is why most people fail even after understanding everything. They try to apply new behaviors without changing who they believe they are. As long as your identity stays the same, your actions will eventually return to old patterns. You can push yourself for a few days, maybe a few weeks, but sooner or later, you fall back into what feels familiar. In Discourses of Epictetus, Book 3, Chapter 23, the principle is clear. Do not act as if you will live a long time. What you do now defines who you are becoming. Not what you intend, not what you plan, but what you repeat. This is where the real shift happens. You stop seeing yourself as someone trying to improve, and you start acting as someone who already operates differently. Not perfectly, but consistently. Think about the difference. A person who sees himself as undisciplined will constantly negotiate with his own actions. He will question if he should act, if he feels ready, if it is the right moment. Every decision becomes a debate. A person who sees himself as disciplined does not negotiate. He acts because that is what he does. The decision is already made. This removes friction. Napoleon Hill emphasizes a similar idea through belief. Your results follow your dominant thoughts. If you constantly reinforce the idea that you are inconsistent, distracted, or uncertain, your actions will reflect that. Identity shapes behavior. Now look at your current pattern. When you delay, you reinforce hesitation. When you stop, you reinforce inconsistency. When you seek validation, you reinforce dependence. Each action confirms a version of yourself. That version becomes stronger over time. The shift begins when you interrupt this pattern. You act before you feel ready. You execute without external confirmation. You continue even when there is no visible result. Each one of these actions sends a different signal to your mind. You are no longer someone who waits. You are someone who moves. At first, this feels forced. It feels unnatural. That is expected. You are breaking a pattern that has been repeated for a long time. But repetition works both ways. If old patterns were built through repetition, new patterns are built the same way. The more you act in alignment with the new identity, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, what felt difficult becomes standard. You no longer rely on motivation because your behavior is not driven by feeling. It is driven by identity. At that point, consistency stops being effort. It becomes automatic. This is where most people never arrive, not because it is complex, but because they stop before the shift completes. They expect immediate comfort. When they do not feel it, they assume something is wrong. Nothing is wrong. Discomfort is part of transformation. Once you accept that, you stop resisting the process. You stop questioning every step. You continue long enough for the identity to stabilize. And when identity stabilizes, your actions follow without resistance. That is when real change becomes permanent. There is a phase where nothing seems to change. You act, you stay consistent, you follow your structure, and still, the external world looks the same. No recognition, no clear reward, no visible breakthrough. This is the phase where most people stop. Not because they cannot continue, but because they expect confirmation too early. They want proof that their effort is working before it has enough time to compound. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 6, paragraph 26, the idea is simple. Do not expect the fruit before the season. Growth follows a process that cannot be accelerated by impatience. Most people ignore this. They measure progress daily, looking for immediate results. When they do not see change, they assume nothing is happening. That assumption leads to doubt. Doubt leads to interruption. Interruption resets progress. This is why they never reach visible results. Now consider what is actually happening beneath the surface. Every day you execute, your capacity increases. Your decisions become faster. Your focus becomes stronger. Your resistance to distraction improves. These changes are not immediately visible, but they are building the foundation for results. This is accumulation. Napoleon Hill describes success as the result of persistent effort applied toward a definite goal. The key word is persistent. Not occasional. Not temporary. Continuous. When effort is continuous, something shifts. At first, progress is internal. Skills improve. Habits stabilize. Identity strengthens. Then at a certain point, external results begin to reflect that internal change. This is when everything becomes visible. Opportunities start to appear. Results begin to show. Recognition increases. Not because you suddenly became different, but because the process reached a level where it could no longer stay hidden. Most people never reach this point. They stop too early. They expect visible results before internal alignment is complete. When they do not see change, they return to old patterns, and the cycle repeats. The difference is not talent. It is timing. Those who continue long enough cross the invisible phase. Those who stop remain in it. Think about how close you might already be. How many times did you quit just before something could have changed? How many times did you abandon a process because you could not see immediate reward? Each one of those moments could have been the turning point. But without persistence, that point is never reached. This is where patience becomes strategic. Not passive waiting, but active continuation. You keep executing, not because you see results, but because you understand the process. You trust that repetition will eventually convert into visibility. And when that conversion happens, the difference is clear. What once felt slow becomes rapid. What once felt uncertain becomes obvious. What once required effort becomes natural. Results stop being occasional. They become consistent. At that point, you are no longer chasing progress. You are producing it. You now see the pattern. You stop reacting, you protect your focus, you choose a direction. You execute without waiting. You repeat long enough to reach visibility. At this point, there are only two paths. You either return to the old cycle, or you cross a line that changes how you operate permanently. Most people go back, not because they do not understand, but because the old way is easier. It requires less responsibility, less discipline, less confrontation with reality. They choose comfort over progress, and slowly, everything you just learned fades. They go back to reacting, back to waiting, back to seeking validation, back to starting and stopping. Nothing changes. Now consider the other path. You decide that returning is no longer an option. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 4, paragraph 17, the idea is clear. Do not waste what remains of your life in thoughts about others when it does not lead to something useful. This is not just philosophy. It is a decision. You stop giving energy to what does not move you forward. Napoleon Hill reinforces this with a principle that defines results. Persistence with purpose. Not random effort. Not temporary discipline. Continuous movement in a single direction. This is where everything locks in. You no longer question if you should act. You no longer wait for the right moment. You no longer depend on how you feel. You follow the structure you created. At first, this feels intense. It demands attention, effort, awareness. But over time, it simplifies everything. Decisions become automatic. Distractions lose power. Focus becomes stable. You move without hesitation. And once you reach this point, going back becomes difficult because you start to see clearly. You see how much time was lost in hesitation. You see how much energy was wasted on reaction. You see how many opportunities passed while you were waiting. That awareness changes your standard. You no longer accept delay. You no longer tolerate inconsistency. You no longer justify inaction. This is the point of no return, not because success is guaranteed, but because your behavior no longer allows you to stay in the same place. From here, results are no longer a question of possibility. They become a matter of time, and the only thing left is to continue. If this message reached you, you already know what to do.